All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you about the Littleton Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. This will be the first of two meetings. The second one will be in May. We'll host an in-person public meeting. So as we get started, feel free to post any questions or thoughts you have in the chat, and we'll get to those before we get into the breakout rooms. We are going to go through a presentation to show you some of the existing conditions, as well as some of the survey responses and some of our draft thoughts that we're putting together about potential recommendations. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms for about half an hour to have small group conversations with all of you to hear your feedback on some of the information that we shared. And then we'll come back, do some share outs, and share with you next steps for the plan. Just so everyone is aware, we are recording today's public meeting. The final recording will be available on Littleton's, the town's website for you to access if you need to leave early or if you need to reference the meeting for any purpose in the future. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can turn off your camera or leave the meeting, although we hope you stay with us. All comments shared verbally and in the chat will be recorded. So we'll make sure that we keep all of that feedback as we're working on our recommendations. We ensure that all of that is recorded. I'll hand it over to Maren to introduce the plan.
All right. Thank you very much, Mara. My name is Maren Toohill. I'm the town planner. The town has contracted with MAPC to produce and go through the process of producing a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. This work was funded through part of the mitigation fees provided by the Amazon building for their last mile distribution warehouse over on Taylor Street. So went through the procurement process, was able to select MAPC to do the work. And I'm always pleased when we get to work with MAPC because they bring such a wealth of experience with them. I know Mara had just been working on several other bicycle and pedestrian plans for other communities. So she brings all that experience with her. And we know David well from his mapping work with the NRG group, Neshoba Regional Greenways, most recently. So thank you for bringing your expertise to us. And it's great to be working with you again.
Great. Thank you, Maren. And to introduce the project team, Maren just introduced herself. We also are working with the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Council to help us throughout the project. From the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is your regional planning agency, you can see the map here of the area that we cover. My name is Mara Holland. I'm a senior transportation planner at MAPC. And I'll hand it over to David to introduce himself.
Is your transportation planner at MAPC as well?
Great, thank you, David. And before we get started, we'd love to do a quick poll to learn a little bit about who's in the room with us. Audie, could you make the poll live? So we have two quick questions. The first one asks about your relation, your interest to the bike and pedestrian plan. And the second question, if you scroll down, asks about if any members of your household match any of the following descriptions. We'd love to learn more about who folks have in their household as far as, children, seniors, if someone has a disability or non-English speaking, because those are folks that are often more vulnerable in the transportation space. And we definitely want to make sure that when we are putting together these plans, we really account for those folks who are going to be moving about the town. All right, looks like we have about 13 of 22 people. We got about half the folks so far. We'll wait another minute to see if we can get everyone to respond. We have a few more people, two more. Great. Well, we have 90% participation, which I think is great. Audie, I think we can end the poll and share results. So it looks like about 90% of participants are town residents, which is great. We have some employees of the town. We have a frequent visitor to the town, and a couple property owners, which is wonderful. Wonderful to have you all here. As far as members of your household, we have a number of folks who have seniors in their household, many folks that have children. We also had a number of people respond to the public survey that reflected these demographics as well. We have a person with a disability. So good to know that you are here and having your voice heard in this plan. So thank you all for taking that quick survey for us, so we get a sense of who's with us today. So a quick overview. The town, as I'm sure all of you are aware, has many relevant boards and committees, including the Town Select Board, the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Transportation Advisory Committee, Master Plan Implementation Committee, and more that are all really relevant to a bike and pedestrian plan for the town. We've talked to many folks so far within the town, and we're going to continue to have more one-on-one conversations as we go through the spring, and we help to put together the recommendations for all of you. The final plan will show a comprehensive transportation network that will utilize a variety of facilities such as trails, pathways, potentially bike lanes, which would be on-street, shared lanes, potentially off-street, multi-use pathways. Sidewalks was a big one that we heard in the survey. So we'll definitely consider all of those different types of options. We'll also be thinking about programs and policies that the town can implement to help make walking, biking, and rolling all safer and more enjoyable for all of you that want to do that on a regular basis. And just so you know, we are talking about walking, biking, and rolling in this plan. Rolling includes other types of personal wheeled mobility besides biking, such as someone who's using a wheelchair or a walker, someone who's in a scooter, a parent pushing a stroller, mopeds, skateboards. There's those one wheel things that people are using now. So like a whole range of micromobility that people are using now. So we want to be really inclusive and thinking about all the different ways that people want to get around, and like how to plan for the current and future uses that some of these facilities might experience. We also want to be conscious that Littleton is experiencing a lot of development right now. There are a number of current projects coming up. There's new zoning in Littleton Common that requires 10-foot sidewalks, which is really wonderful to have more people be able to use the sidewalk, and especially people who are using any type of mobility device. It makes using the sidewalk a lot easier. There's a new development. There's a couple new developments happening right around Littleton Common, including 550 King Street, which is going to be a mix of residential and commercial. There's going to be 410 Great Road, which is going to be residential, and the Northern Bank redevelopment, which I think is 5 different parcels. And then in addition to those redevelopment projects that are happening, there's also the MBTA communities legislation that is requiring towns to build dense housing near transit stations. And the blue dot here is showing where the Littleton commuter rail is. So near that commuter rail station, at some point in the future, there's likely to be some multi-unit housing right around there, which will make it a lot easier for the folks that live there to be able to commute via the commuter rail. So we're thinking about all of those when we're putting together this plan. and thinking about some of those bike, pedestrian, and rolling connections as well. David, I think I'll hand it to you for the slide for the next few.
Excellent. Thank you, Mara. The next few slides will talk about the existing infrastructure in particular, and later on in the presentation, we'll talk about some potential opportunities in the town. This slide represents the roadway classification. That's sort of the hierarchy of the roadway system. Obviously, Route 2 and 495 do not allow bicycles or pedestrians. They also can be barriers to cycling and walking, particularly on the crossings that have interchanges. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And the other major roadways in the red are what we call the urban principal arterials, which are the state highways, 119, 110, 2A. And then some of the other major roads in the orange, Harvard Avenue, and a few others that are through streets that will be, core roadways that we'll be looking at in terms of the bicycle pedestrian network. Is someone else moving slides, or is that? Yeah, thank you. Roadway jurisdiction. So I wanted to note that all of the roadways shown in green are under control of MassDOT. Obviously Route 2 and 485, which we're not really addressing, but particularly 119, 110, and 2A, and a few others are under MassDOT control. When we make recommendations for the plan, this is irrespective of who has control of the roadway, but just to note that any improvements or any changes to this roadway would have to go through MassDOT on that. Next. This is a map of the sidewalk network in the town. As you can see, it's focused primarily on the center, connects to the high school and to the town complex and a few other schools, but it does not go beyond that for the most part. A few of the newer subdivisions have sidewalks, but it's not by no means comprehensive. And one of the goals is to have a sidewalk on every arterial street in town, and we'll be looking at priorities for where that should go first, or what are the highest priorities for that, expanding that sidewalk network. Next. This is a map of the existing trail system in town. Those orangish red lines are what we call the foot trails or hiking trails or trails through primarily conservation areas. The green lines are what we call shared use paths. Those are paved trails through town. It's very little. It's primarily connecting the school and library up to the main street and the common. The blue lines represent bike lanes, which is right now just in the common. The closest rail trail, and others connections to the rail trail, would be the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which is the green line at the bottom right corner of the screen there of the image. There's also a spur line that's partially shown, that brown line that extends through Westwood, not Westwood. Is it Westwood? Is the town, right, Maren?
I'm through part of Westford.
Westford, I knew it was Westford. Okay,
Right.
yeah, I knew I was wrong. And it does go by the northern edge of Neshoba Ski Hill, and also the corridor connects. It's not shown on the map. It connects past, almost adjacent to Kimball Farm. So if that rail trail were to be developed, that would provide a great connection to, closer to Littleton to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. But that's really, Westford's project to do. And as far as I know, there's no active efforts in that regard, but it's something we would encourage that happening. What else? Yeah, you would note that there's an extensive trail system in the conservation lands, but one of the things we're looking at, and I'll explain the later slide, is opportunities to connect those two. Next slide. And I'll turn it back to, I think, Mara for those crashes.
Thanks, David. So Littleton, at the moment, does not have a lot of bike and pedestrian crashes that have happened in the last few years. However, that might also be that there's a lower volume of people walking and biking in the last few years. There was one fatal pedestrian crash that occurred in West Littleton on Route 2A. It's designated by that red circle there. So these areas that you do see on the map, the orange is where there's been a cyclist crash. The pink triangle is a pedestrian crash. And so these are areas that we want to evaluate because they've been safety issues in the past. Not surprisingly, these crashes have been concentrated on some of the major roads through your town. These are also some of the major roads that we heard about in the public survey, as well as some being really significant challenges for people to get where they need to go from a walking, biking, and rolling perspective. Now, this map I think is quite startling. This is the number of vehicle crashes that have happened in the town from 2019 to 2021. There's been a few fatal crashes, though indicated by the larger red dots, a number of non-fatal injuries, which are the pink dots. And then there's most of what you see here is just property damage, which is the light blue dots. Most of these crashes are concentrated again on these main connector roads. If you remember back to the map that David showed earlier, these also align with a lot of the state-owned roads that are state-controlled roads that are running through the town. For example, 495 has quite a few of the crashes, as well as Great Road and 110 as well. So these are definitely some roads that we're taking a look at for the bike and pedestrian plan for safety reasons because they've had a lot of crashes. So now I'm going to jump into the survey results. We had a really robust survey that took place in November and December of last year. We had over 700 people respond to the survey, which is a really fantastic response rate. I'm sure many of you filled out the survey. 97% of the people who responded were Littleton residents. So that's great to know that the people that were providing feedback were the people that would potentially benefit from it as well. Here, one of the first questions we asked is do you walk, bike, or roll in Littleton now? A large amount of people, over 500, said they do walk around town. About 300 people said they biked. And then about maybe 175 said they don't now, but they would if it were safer, easier, more convenient to do so in the town. So let me ask people, like, what would encourage you to walk, bike, or roll more in Littleton? The number one response, with over 550 people responding, said more connected multi-use trails and sidewalks. Sidewalks, I think, was the number one response that we received from people in the survey, both in the multiple choice questions and in the qualitative answers as well, was a really huge request for a lot of people in the town of Littleton. Number two here was better maintained sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, and other infrastructure. And number three was walking, biking, and rolling route feels safe. So these are all pretty well connected, and thinking about safe infrastructure, slowing down traffic, and really having more opportunities that are safe and enjoyable for people to get around via walking, biking, and rolling in town. We also asked, how would you like to use Littleton's current and future trails? Although we are transportation staff, we do recognize that people use these spaces in a lot of different ways for recreation, for just, going out and, sitting on a bench and enjoying the space, maybe exploring nature, things like that. And so we wanted to ask, residents, what are some of the uses that you would really like to enjoy on some of these spaces? Number one by far was walking. There's a lot of people in town that really enjoy walking on the trails. Number two was cycling for recreation or transportation. And number three was exploring nature. So definitely a mix of recreation, transportation uses that folks want to enjoy on these trails. To what places would you and your family like to walk, bike, or roll if you felt safe doing so? Number one was parks, including natural areas, lakes, and conservation lands. A very close number two was around my neighborhood. There was a lot of folks that mentioned just getting around their neighborhood didn't feel safe. Number three was Littleton Common area, including the library and the town hall. There were also some other comments about shopping centers, restaurants, places where people wanted to go, and commercial centers, things like that. We also included some survey quotes here. I wanted to give folks kind of a breadth of some of the feedback that we received about some of the ways that people wanted to see improvements in the town. There are a number of people who were thinking about more recreation and physical activity, people that wanted to have more opportunities to run and bike in Littleton. There are some folks that mentioned specifically to transportation that they really wanted to be able to bike to the MBTA commuter station, and that their road getting there really does not feel safe. There's some folks that mentioned some of the infrastructure, such as flashing street signs and crosswalks needed to be improved. They wanted connections to nearby bike paths, like the ones that David mentioned earlier. There were a number of parents that responded to the survey and mentioned walking and biking to school for children was really important to them, and for kids to just be able to get to a friend's house after school or be able to walk down the block was really important and not really as accessible right now. And as I mentioned, sidewalks were definitely the biggest concern and request that people had in the survey that we put out. So, quick summary of the survey. Sidewalks, as I said, number one request. Some other requests: safe routes to school for children to walk and bike, off-street paths and trails for running, biking, and walking were something that a lot of residents valued now and wanted to see more of within the town. Connections to key destinations. Road maintenance was a concern, especially for people who biked. And supporting amenities such as lighting, signage, benches, sort of these other pieces that are really helpful to make people feel comfortable and safe when they are walking, biking, or rolling. Some of the top concerns were safety, traffic. That includes the speed of traffic, the volume of traffic, also the type of traffic. There were a lot of trucks. We heard that there's a lot of folks that come off the highways and cut through Littleton, which is a real concern for people. Lack of connected routes to get from one place to another that people want to go. Road and sidewalk maintenance can create some barriers for some people. And then the experience for children, seniors, and people with disabilities is challenging in certain areas for people to be able to get around, especially without a car. David, so I think I will hand it back to you to go over the next couple slides.
Thanks. The next couple slides will focus on infrastructure improvements. I will present a few ideas. These are just ideas. These are opportunities, and these are ideas that I hope that you all will discuss in the breakout rooms that we have after the presentation. The opportunities are many. We have the Safe Routes to School program that can provide improved sidewalks. We're looking at creating a connected network of trails and paths. One of the highest priority. So the highest priority origin destinations are three areas. One, the commuter, the center of town, the Littleton Common, 2, the commuter rail, 3, the high school, also the town hall complex and library, which is situated pretty close to the common. So that sort of triangle area is sort of the highest priority in terms of our goal to create a connected path network, a network that's accessible, it's separate from traffic on the busier streets. So it represents some opportunities there. We're looking at contiguous sidewalks on all of the arterial streets, and making sure that those are programmed to move forward, and then traffic calming measures on the other streets. This particular photo that I took during our site visit last summer on Harwood illustrates the opportunities and challenges throughout Littleton. This is a pretty typical street in the town, as I understand. There is a small shoulder in this section, but it's certainly not wide enough for proper use by a pedestrian, certainly not 2 pedestrians passing. And in this case, you see a cyclist, 2 walkers, and 2 dogs. So it's not an ideal situation. But then again, a wider shoulder might encourage higher speed traffic. So, looking at what are the opportunities to create a better space. In some case, we're looking at creating a shared roadway space for all users, and maybe it involves traffic calming or slowing traffic down on this particular street. So next slide. So when we're looking at recommendations for roadway improvements or changes in the plan, this is a slide of just some of the opportunities that we envision seeing in the town. And so on the upper left is a sample of taking excess roadway space and creating a 2-way bike lane on that street. And one opportunity for doing that, for example, is on Taylor Street as it goes over 495 and Route 2. Right now, it's a very wide street, and there could be an opportunity on a street like that to do what's shown in that photo on the upper left. On the upper right is looking at on the road how we can do a shared street, and that's actually by removing the center line and putting street perhaps like Harwood, and moving the center line and putting in dash shoulders that prioritize the cyclists and pedestrians that are on the shoulder surface versus the drivers that are on the roadway, but all would share the same space. In many cases, we're really, the potential for creating off-road or paths, trails that are not on the roadway itself. In the lower left is a typical path that you might see throughout the parts of the town forest and other trails throughout the region. Now, this particular photo, I'm showing that example because it's a bit wider than a typical single track trail. It's a fairly smooth surface. It's a natural surface, but if that could be used as part of the network to allow cycling and walking, and more mobility uses on that corridor to connect a network of trails like that. On the right is what we call a shared use path. It's a 2-way path that could be, like you see on the Bruce Freeman, but in this example, it's right next to the roadway itself. So looking at opportunities to do just that. And as I understand Foster Street, this what we show in the lower right in Foster Street, there's a design project to be implemented, I think, as early as next year. And we're looking at opportunities to do more of that in the town. Next. So the next slide is a map of some of the ideas or some of the opportunities to develop that. I would show that, I'll just mention a few things in this slide. The blue lines here are basically when I talked about the triangle, the high school and the downtown and the commuter rail station. The thicker orange lines are a potential walking or hiking, connected walking or hiking trail network in the town, and I'll explain some of the opportunities there. On the left, you see a dashed purple line that is Taylor Street that I mentioned. They're creating a two-way bike lane on one side of the street there that would connect that region. The dashed green line just north of the commuter rail station, that's showing a potential shared path that would connect from the commuter rail station through two properties up to Harwood and beyond to the Mill Hill Conservation Area. There is a larger parcel there that has a potential development opportunity, and so that perhaps that if we provide this opportunity through the plan, that there would be, maybe some mitigation of development to provide a trail as part of that. There is a retirement community just north of that, which we'd have to engage with for extending that path, but there's ample room to do that. And then connecting into conservation land. But essentially, this takes you all the way up to where that interchanges, where it says Beaver Brook, and then we can connect into the castle playground and up into the town complex, town hall, library, and schools, and then it's into the town center. So this would create a off-road trail system in many sections, and then using lower traffic streets on other streets. I'm not going to find the name of it right now, but hold on a second. Warren Street, and then connecting there. The other piece of it is connecting through the Hartwell Memorial Reserve, using the existing trail network there to connect it around and take you over to the high school and provide some traffic calming opportunities in that area on Hartwell Avenue, as well as New Estate Road to connect to the high school. I would note that looking at particularly 2A and perhaps 119 Great Road as well, those roadways have a significant amount of truck traffic during the day. So certainly we could scope wider shoulders for cycling, but it's still a pretty heavily trafficked street with lots of turning movements of vehicles. So, separating this particular for cycling use is more ideal than a shoulder. And avoiding those roads as part of the major network is also being considered. Now, with regards to the sort of orangish color wider lines, is looking at the sort of creating a trail network that would connect from Acton, Nagog Pond into Long Pond into town center, and then also over to the commuter rail station. However, there are some gaps in the trail network, particularly on the west side of Long Pond. I put in some dashed lines there to show potential connections. However, both of those areas are not in their private property, so that would be a challenge to do that. But just showing sort of the desire line that there's significant gaps to connect extensive trail network there, plus some other gaps. But if that were connected up, that would create quite a robust footpath or trail network through the town because of the extensive open space, and provide more opportunities to connect that up. Also, connecting down. Again, we can talk more about this in the breakout sessions of sort of your key concerns and asks as part of that. Next slide. So ongoing challenges, we mentioned state-owned roadways, earlier. I think this is the connection over 495, which is not friendly for cycling or walking, certainly cut through and limited width on roadways, and then ownership issues. I believe that's our last slide before questions, and I think Mara's facilitating that.
Thank you, David. So now we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes for any questions that anyone has. Once we finish questions, we'll go into the breakout rooms and have some smaller discussions with folks. If anyone does have a question now, they can either put it into the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature. which should be at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. And if anyone has any questions about some of the existing conditions work that we did, or the survey results, or some of the proposals, we are happy to take those. So first I'll go to Audie to see if there's any questions in the chat.
I see a question from Rochelle. Can we talk about how we're going to fund these projects?
Yeah, great question. As part of the final recommendations, which the plan will be finalized in June, we're going to put together a matrix with the recommendations about how to get to implementation, and that will include funding opportunities. And I can say that there are a number of funding opportunities available now. And just to give you some examples, the state has a couple funding opportunities. One of them is called Shared Streets and Spaces, which was started during COVID for a lot of either temporary or quick build projects. And we're not quite sure yet if that's going to continue under the current administration, but it has funded millions and millions of dollars of like bike and pedestrian projects and has been very successful. There's also federal funding that comes through the MPO that can be applied for the Community Connections Grant, which is more short-term, or major projects can be put into the Transportation Improvement Program, which is more long-term. So there are a number of opportunities right now for funding. And in that final recommendations that we're going to be giving to the town will specify which projects might work best for which funding opportunities. Great. Any other questions in the chat before we go to raised hands?
I see a question from Paul asking if lighting is included in the planning of any of these paths. And I'd also add that the state's Complete Streets program, of which Littleton is a member, is another funding mechanism. So I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Addie. As far as lighting goes, I think that's definitely something we can consider if that's a strong interest from town residents to have lighting on some or all of some of the trails or paths. I know some folks sometimes want some of those paths to remain natural and to be dark at night, but if folks are interested in lighting, we can definitely include some of that in our recommendations. We did hear that lighting was an interest and a concern as well for walking, biking, and rolling in the town. I'm sure, especially as winter is here and there's less light in general. Okay, if there's no other, go ahead. Typically on rail trail projects like the Bruce Freeman, you do not see lighting. There's certainly lighting along roadways, and it's really it's something that to be brought up in the design to look at where lighting would be appropriate or not. Great, thanks, David. So I think now we'll go to raised hands. I see Gary, you have your hand up. Feel free to ask your question.
Sure, great, thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate the effort that went into this. I had a question on some of the routes that David showed. So the two-parter, I guess. The orange ones, those are all trails, right? Those are not designed for, those are all off-road, right? Okay. Right, they're not designed as a hard surface for cycling. Okay. And then the route that you had that goes from the train station parallels 495 that would connect to 2A 110. What kind of service were you envisioning for that, and what's the grade on that route? Well, there's some variability back there. I did walk the route, but it's relatively flat and relatively dry. That development parcel adjacent to the station has an opportunity to provide an accessible grade there. In terms of surface, I'm envisioning an accessible surface, whether that's asphalt or stone dust or some gravel, some sort of
not, naturalish surface, but an accessible surface wide enough for two-way cycling and walking.
And there's only two properties that would be affected. Is that right?
Two properties plus part of it would go through, would probably be on MassDOT. There is a private parcel in Hardwood itself, but that could be avoided by using the MassDOT right of way.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, great. Thank you.
The one parcel could be provided, through the development opportunities. Really, the retirement community would be the bigger question.
Okay.
Great. Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Comments are great too. Okay, seeing none, I think we can move into breakout rooms. So we have a couple questions for all of you to hear a little bit more about your reactions to the project, as well as your thoughts on what you think should be included as well. We'll probably be in the breakout rooms for about half an hour, and then we'll come back together and do a share out of some of the topics that were discussed and information that was brought up. I just see one more question. What is the time frame we are looking at? Time frame as far as getting the plan done, or time frame for? Oh, it looks like we're heading into breakouts. We'll come back to that question when we come back.
I feel very special. Some of us came back.
Did we go through all of the questions? No, all 5?
What do you think is missing, and is there anything else we didn't cover? Was the here we go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you all had a really wonderful breakout session. I know room 1 was really active and we had a great discussion, and really appreciate everyone's thoughtful feedback. We're going to spend a few minutes doing kind of a quick share out of what everyone talked about in their breakout rooms, so we can get an idea of some of the questions, comments, concerns, ideas people have for the project. And so we'll go through for the 3 facilitators. So I think I'll start with Marin, if you want to give some feedback about what you all talked about, and then we'll go to David, and then last I will share out for our group.
Yeah, I'll share my detailed notes with you. Just a few of the points that were made. The walking in a lot of areas of town is difficult and it doesn't feel safe. During the pandemic, there was a noticeable increase in the use of a lot of the trails, and which left some trash and some parking problems. Let's see. Another highlight was safety along the state highways, and another big point was how to get to and from the commuter rail station, both for new developments that are coming near Littleton Common, and how that ties in with MBTA community requirements and the improvements that are planned for Foster Street that are funded for Foster Street. So we had kind of a wide-ranging discussion. A question about how we're going to prioritize the projects, and a question about how the town will share better with residents, share the information on when repaving or sidewalk and bicycle and pedestrian accommodations are going on a certain street, when that's happening. So it was quite an active group, and I got a lot of good questions.
Great, thanks, Marin. Before we jump to David, I just want to address the question about prioritization. We are still working on that. I think it's a great question. We have talked about a similar prioritization as happened in your master plan. We think that was a pretty good way to prioritize projects. However, if all of you have thoughts about how you would like to prioritize projects like safety first or connectivity or things like that, we're happy to hear those as well. I think what we'll probably end up doing is a mix of those things, including like what is most feasible, what might have funding coming up soon, definitely safety, connectivity, probably a mix of some of those factors, but happy to hear any additional thoughts folks have on that. Great. So David, do you want to do a quick share out from your group?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's definitely concern amongst our group, which is very well informed and knowledgeable, and many have been in town for quite a while, is that the roads are not in general safe for cycling, and the walking network is disconnected. And so, where do you start to provide particularly that cycling or all hard surface access to corridors? There was emphasis on priority to connect the schools. Many kids are already walking and biking to school, and to improve upon that. There was also interest in a Long Lake, and Long Pond, I'm sorry, and as several people noted, there's long been a desire to provide access around the pond, and the west side area is which I mentioned in the presentation because I thought it was a need by not knowing the issues, but it was obviously it's a long desired need in the town, and to try to create a continuous rail corridor around Long Pond. So that's certainly probably a top right. It's in the middle of the town. It connects a number of open spaces, and so trying to find a need in that regard through boardwalks or whatever it might be. And then finally, in terms of biking, it was brought up that sort of Harwood Avenue is the center of existing cycling in town, and it is the best east-west corridor because it's not it's not 2A, and it's not and it's not other streets. It's sort of the best way, and what can be done for Harwood to create a space where cyclists and walkers and there's children that are on that area as well. So I think focusing on as a priority corridor Harwood for this plan would be one priority. That's good for now. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, David. I'll say in my group, we also had a really great discussion about a variety of topics related to the bike and pedestrian plan. One of the comments was around how the new development may affect traffic on the side roads, thinking about, if that will push more traffic onto the side roads and then create more safety challenges for people walking and biking. There was a comment about how citizens might be able to help this process and what might be some policies or initiatives that could be implemented more at the hyper local level in neighborhoods or in more local areas that could help cut down traffic, especially cut through traffic potentially from the highways. That's not something that we've looked at so far, but definitely something we will consider. There were a number of comments about how connected trails would be a real benefit, especially getting people off of the streets, as the street network right now does have a lot of safety challenges. Also see a lot of benefits for children, getting children to be in safer areas, off street. Also thinking about how kids walk and bike frequently right after school and around school, and how those areas could be made safer. In general, a lot of comments about additional safety measures that are needed on streets, traffic calming. There was some conversation about how putting some off-street paths through conservation lands might have conservation restrictions, and to think about some of those challenges that might come up with the off-street paths. And there were a number of comments about how transportation and recreation patterns have changed since the pandemic. There's a lot. There were a number of people in our group who were commuting less and spending more time at home, and therefore having more opportunities to walk or bike during the week and at sort of like off-peak hours. And yeah, I think there's a couple other things. More options for people who need hard surfaces and more accessible surfaces. And there was also a comment about if some of the new development could help to fund more walking and biking infrastructure, especially around Littleton Common. And that's pretty much all the comments that we got in our group. So thank you all very much for your time to give us that feedback. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and we're going to go to our last slide. We are right on time here, which is great. We'll get you guys right out at 7:30. Great. So this is our last slide where we're just going to talk to you about next steps for this project. The timeline coming up. So March 2023, it's March 1st. We're having this public meeting tonight. In April, we're going to put a draft together for the town to review, a draft plan. In May, we will have another public meeting. We're planning an in-person public meeting, I believe for May 10th. And we welcome all of you to come. At that time, we will have draft recommendations for you to take a look at and provide feedback on. I mentioned in my group, for folks that are not able to come to the in-person public meeting, we may be able to put together some opportunities for people to provide comments on the draft recommendations in a more virtual setting, potentially, if we put those on the town website or provide some other opportunity to provide feedback. And then the final plan will be sent to the town in June for implementation going forward. And then I'll just hand it over to Marin quickly to talk about the process the town will go through after the plan is completed.
Yeah, after the town gets the plan from MAPC that includes responses to the meeting comments at the meeting in May, then the bicycle and pedestrian plan will go to the select board for their approval. Then after that, the fund starts. We get to use recommendations from those plans to apply for grants and to figure out, best ways to move the recommendations forward.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I'm going to stop sharing. It looks like we have one more question.
Yes, hi. So I know you have people from the select board on call. I don't know if anybody has told you. Littleton will have soon will own a building where park and rec programs will happen that will be close to the high school. So I don't know. So technically that's not going to be a school, but that's where a lot of programs for, kids and adults apparently will happen. Alicia can say more about that, I think. So I don't know if that would qualify for any grants that you have for improving connection to schools or school activities, because I think, I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, but the after school program also might be in that building as well.
Hi, Yolanda. Yeah, you're absolutely right on that the program will move over to that area. We purchased the building as a town, I say we, and this is, it's a long time off. We're probably looking at anywhere between a year to 2 years would be my guess before we can even, get into that space. But, connectability and being able to transport from schools is something that we're definitely working with the schools on to come up with a plan for that. So yeah, I don't know if that helps you or answers any of your questions. So.
Well, so I'm asking more about, because Mara mentioned grants and other funding to help connect schools. So I don't know if those funds would also cover any places where there are after school programs or recreational programs for children and adults.
It's a great suggestion.
Yeah. The Safe Routes to School program, I believe, is just restricted to school buildings. But it is a great consideration, as school children and school programs do happen outside of schools. However, my current knowledge tells me that the Safe Routes to School program that MassDOT runs is only for infrastructure and improvements directly around school buildings.
Yeah, I'll jump in just a little bit on that. The beauty of the 36 King Street site is that it is already connected by sidewalk to the public schools, and that's the sidewalk that's off of the road. It's next to the tennis courts.
Right. So if we have a good connection to high school, then Indian Hill is going to be nicely connected as well.
Yeah.
Audie?
Hey everyone, Adi Nochur, also on the transportation team with MAPC here, along with Mara and David. I've been lurking in the background tonight as your tech guru, but really appreciate all the engagement and discussion. I think you all are on track to put together a great plan here. Just want to call attention to one more question in the chat from Amy Green, asking if this effort can also dovetail with the open space and recreation plan that's being prepared. So whoever wants to take that on.
No, I'll take that on, Amy. Yes, we'll talk. Amy's the conservation agent for the town.
And Marin also put in the chat that there's a complete streets prioritization plan happening, an update happening now as well, and that will put together a list of about 15 projects in the town that are going to be added to this list. And then that list will be available for Complete Streets funding through the Complete Streets program. And that's also another opportunity for to see improvements, as I know, this group especially is really interested in seeing walking and biking improvements. The Complete Streets program and update is another good way for all of you to be involved. And Marin put that information in the chat about that public meeting coming up at the end of March. The slides for tonight will be available on the town's website. I think Marin could drop that into the chat, as well as this recording will be accessed through there as well. And if you all have any other questions, I am going to put my email in the chat. You can also email Marin as well, and one of us will get back to you with any additional questions or thoughts or comments you have on the plan. And in between now and if you have any questions in between now and the May meeting, and we hope to see all of you in May to provide some more comments when we get further into our recommendations.
Yeah, I was able to share the link where I will be posting today's slides. And then you just have to go to the LCTV section of the town website, and hopefully within a few days, if not a week, we'll get the video of this meeting posted there.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for spending your night with us and for giving us some really valuable feedback for the bike and pedestrian plan. We really appreciate your time and thoughts. And we hope to put together a really great plan that works for all of you, and look forward to seeing you at the May public meeting.